Hello, I'm Alex Hopkins with Connect and Collaborate, and today we are talking about the 2018 ballot guide put together by the Common Sense Policy Roundtable. And it is exciting stuff because, as you know, tomorrow is election day, so go ahead and get those ballots in. If you have not already, be sure to drop by a polling center tomorrow so you can get your votes in. But we're going to talk about this 2018 ballot guide with Chris Brown. He's in studio. He's the director again of policy and research at Common Sense Policy Roundtable. First of all, Chris, how are you? It's been a little bit since we've had you on.
Yes. No, thanks for having me back.
Yeah.
Really enjoying this opportunity to get out and continue to talk about our work and share the information with your listeners. So glad to be here.
Yeah, and we were just talking off air. I like to compare your ballot guide that you just came out with a little bit to Ballotpedia, which is what I have used in years previous to catch up on all of my information, because it's less biased than if you were to reach out to certain organizations and see what they have to say. But Common Sense Policy Roundtable, Ballotpedia actually uses a lot of your studies. So might as well cut out the middleman there and just go to CSPR and read the ballot guide there.
On some of the issues, yes, someone sent me an update on the media that we've had, and Ballotpedia showed up as using the work. So yeah, it's been great to have the coverage used not just by us and us getting it out, but really the validation of having those third parties talk about it is it's fantastic. Oh
yeah, for sure. And it's nice. It's not nearly as big as I thought it was going to be, because I was reading the online version, and this is adorable. I like it, but it's little bits of information, whatever you would need, and it's very convenient. So talk about the process of how you put this together.
Well, yeah, and thanks, Alex. So CSPR, our mission, you talked about Ballotpedia, and our mission is to provide economic research on key issues that face the state of Colorado. So with really an emphasis on economic impact analysis, economic research, quantifying what these issues mean for Colorado voters, Colorado citizens, and getting that information to business leaders, to elected officials, and to voters. And so, it's a very unique thing in Colorado to have the opportunity to enact legislation. The citizens are enacting incredibly impactful legislation here, and so we have, and while there are a lot of issues on the ballot, and our ballot guide is much more condensed than the blue book that voters got, we have conducted in-depth. There's 30, 40 pages behind each of these if you'd like to go and read that, on 3 issues. So really we only looked at and evaluated 3 or 4, I guess, on the transportation side, given there's 2 that are related. But really 4 of the ballot questions related to issues, related to enacting legislation that voters will face. And so we condensed that information into a format that really highlighted the key findings and the key issues that we think voters should be aware of. But by all means, those that want to dig in, please go find the full studies. There's a lot more to them on our website, csprco.org. So it's just, again, an effort to inform, educate, and that's our mission as an educational organization, a nonprofit that cares about free enterprise issues and this Colorado economy. Wanted to get this as far wide and get in the hands of voters.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit. So we know, there's 13 proposals this year, right?
You tell me.
Yeah, that's I want to say 13 is about right, but it
sounds about right. Yeah.
One of the highest in the country, actually, is one thing that I do know for a fact is that we got a lot on the bill.
You could do a whole research paper on that alone.
Exactly. I thought, why Colorado? Why are we so into
there you go.
Public policies and ballot issues here, right? So one of my favorites that I have talked about over and over again on the show is Proposition 112.
Okay.
And actually, you guys joined us for a study that you did on the setback study, right?
Correct.
Do you mind just a brief overview of that study, and then we'll talk about the actual ballot measure?
Yeah. So that study was a direct response to, at the time, what was Initiative 97. Now it's Proposition 112. And so that study we released in early August, I want to say, late July, just as it was getting confirmed and put on the ballot. But this organization has studied issues related to the oil and gas setback and energy in the state, given its impact to the economy, given its significance over several years. So it was an issue we knew was, if it made it to the ballot, would have a significant impact, and tried to anticipate that as much as we could to get the underlying information and data and go through the review process as we did with faculty at the Colorado School of Mines to ensure that we got credible information to voters. And I just looked at Denver Post again this morning. They had a headline on a couple ballot measures, but the two featured articles on Proposition 112 and Amendment 73, I guess we'll get into, were two featured articles talking about some of our work, again, and so it's front and center, and it's kind of validating to anticipate some of these issues, and then now kind of see that debate out there and get out there and talk to you about what this means.
Exactly, and one of the big things I think people are seeing, so Proposition 112 is, it throws out the word health and safety a lot, right? And it cites health and safety being one of the main reasons that we need this setback for the wells. And through numerous findings, that's simply not true, right?
So, yeah, I guess to talk a little about the issue. So Proposition 112 increases the setback requirement for new drilling. So it doesn't impact for new drilling, new oil and gas drilling, which I'll get to as to why that's very, very important to understand really what that means. It doesn't impact the reciprocal setback. So new housing, new commercial can still build up closer, but it only affects new drilling. So not other activity in its proximity to existing oil and gas. The new activity, the new drilling, is really where most of the economic activity is, and most of the production is. Within the first year, 6 months to a year, a well is producing 40% less than it was when it first got started. So they have these rapid decline rates. So even I've heard some of the counters to our study talk about, well, this doesn't impact existing wells. Existing wells are producing significantly less within the first year, 2 years, to the point where just to maintain sort of a projection in terms of size of the industry and the existing workforce and employment, it has to perpetually have that new production, that new drilling, in order to access those resources. So it's incredible, and yes, there's research on all sides, but we really just turned to the State Department of Public Health and the Environment that specifically studied the air quality issues and issues related to proximity of new drilling and existing residential, commercial buildings, and conclusively said that there is very low, moderate to very low risk. Continue to study the issue. But we talked with the state and what they've done in terms of monitoring air quality and pollutants and all of that, and really relied on their findings.
Right, and it's what a great source to have, right? If you're going to ask anyone about the impacts of health, the Colorado Public Health Department is probably a big role in that.
That's why we went there first.
Well, let's jump into 73, right? And this one is a tough one. So it is a raise in taxes. And there is a supposed education fund that they want to put those taxes in, and that one's going to increase. We're looking at about $1.5, $1.6 billion, right, for education in that raise. But it would be a bracket system of how they raise taxes. It's
complicated.
It is very complicated. That one was tough for me to wrap my head around, really, because there's a lot of verbiage in it. Yeah.
So I was trying to think how I could simplify this, and as best I can, I'll try to. It's really, there's three separate tax changes that actually are occurring. So, and that's even a little oversimplifying it. But I'll bucket into three tax changes on where the money comes from. You're right, roughly about the dollar amount that they expect to raise that would go into this education fund. To the tune of about, on net, $1.5 billion. but it impacts personal income tax, so it changes the state's current flat income tax to a graduated tax, which means a progressive tax, which means higher income earners pay a higher rate. And so it would implement and institute this rate on higher income. It starts at 100 households, joint filers, or individuals that make over $150,000 a year begin to see their tax rate ratchet up, which impacts about 8% of filers, and so that's where the majority of the money comes, about $1.4 billion. It also changes the corporate income tax rate, so it increases the corporate income tax rate by 30%, and it changes residential property taxes. So you want to go into the detail? You want to go there?
Yeah, let's go there.
So this is part of the nuance that's really tough. Is on the property tax side, it actually creates two separate residential property tax assessment rates, one for school districts alone and one for all other local districts.
This was the issue that I was having, was distinguishing between the two.
Okay. So it in the Constitution would set a tax rate on local property taxes at 7% for school districts, and then leaves the non-school districts, fire, police, water, all other local tax districts to have a rate that still fluctuates based upon some of the other rules and laws that are out there that determine how property tax assessment rates are, Gallagher Amendment. And so there's a particularly nasty potential unintended consequence here that I think has gotten some headlines, and we looked at very intensely, that is a really potential severe unintended consequence as those local property taxes interact. And if you remove and you fix the school property tax rate at 7% of the Constitution, if prices continue to rise the way you could very easily interpret the Gallagher Amendment, you would see property assessment rates for all other districts go down, squeezing out revenue for our non-school local property districts, which is a pretty severe and something people should be very aware of, the possibility of that happening, given how this tax code could interact and is interpreted. Assessors have come out and talked about it in this way, and so it's detailed, it's nuanced. It's not even related in our economic impact analysis included the extent to which these rates change on the individual side, the corporate side, and so the macro impacts, but are one thing, and we can talk about that, but just some of the specific tax nuance is also very hard to get your head around, and potentially very, here in Colorado we understand the consequence of these sort of tax changes in our Constitution. Gallagher, Tabor, we know these have lasting effects, and people should be very aware of exactly what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely. That was one thing that I've associated with that. It feels like we need to make more of a change to Gallagher than we do voting yes on this. Amendment 73. Personal opinion here.
Sure.
Not going to
we didn't go there in our work this time,
Yeah, but it seems like there's some just fundamentals within the Gallagher that need to be a little more nuanced, maybe, although if you get too specific in language, you're going to ruin things in the future, whether you know it or not, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the challenge overall with the ballot process is it's asking voters to vote on one, here's the issue, and laid out, and there's not any, there's no changes, there's no
room for flexibility
in this ballot process. It's that flexibility has already been pre-negotiated by the people that sponsored it, or and put it out there, and so they feel this is best. And so when you have some of these underlying issues which you may have questions on or disagree with, it comes as a whole package. So you have to kind of be aware of the entirety of it.
Wonderful. Yeah, this one was it was tough for me mostly because there was a lot to look at. There was a lot to read in 73 for me.
Well, and all that money then goes to this education fund, goes through the existing school formula, and would increase total expenditure to schools by about 20%. So this is a massive increase for education. The one note I will make on that for me was really interesting is that the way that the ballot language was set up is it set up a minimum amount that would have to go. It set a formula for the base amount that the school funding formula would have to be at, and some other provisions of where that money would go in terms of state funding full day kindergarten, although 85% of pre-K and kindergarten students already have access to full day. It's just not funded entirely at 100% by the state. But the minimum requirements under, see if I can get through this, but it really stuck out to me as a numbers guy. This is what they, in terms of what they say where the state spending needs to be as a minimum requirement, out of that 1.6, 1.5 net billion increase in revenue, only about half of that would fulfill the minimum requirements for how they would want the base amount to increase. And so it just leaves another $800 million of money sitting in a fund that legislators would have to determine how it gets appropriated to education. And so in some ways, the tax increase overshoots the minimum spending requirements. In the first fiscal note, it was a minimum of about 1.1. It got revised down because our base amount has continued to increase. Maybe it's too much here, but
Yeah.
it's just fascinating in the sense that you could look at the language and say, well, we need to increase our base per pupil to 7,300. Under current sort of trajectories, by 2020 we'd be there at 7,100 roughly. So, we're already on track to meet some of that minimum requirement. So it just really overshoots the amount in terms of what that tax increase is proportional to what they say the minimum amount they require. A little more nuanced, but a fact and a piece of this that I just found really compelling as to some of the challenges here on the spending side.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you, because looking at it, I personally don't. I'm not going to be hit by that income tax, right? And of course, in my head, I'm like, yeah, let's provide more money for education.
Right.
The issue that we're missing on that is that one, going back to the small businesses, are businesses and
Sure.
Corporate tax. Those are going to increase as well. You're hitting mom and pop shops with that. You're not hitting big Fortune 500 companies. Yeah, Amazon's going to pay that. That's a drop in the bucket for them if they choose to come here, right? What we're looking at hurting is our local communities and neighborhoods with that increase on the corporate tax for them.
Well, actually, it's on the more so on the individual income tax. So a lot of small businesses file as individual earners, as a sole proprietorship, as a pass-through entity, and so they're subject to the individual income tax. And so that's where a lot of the small business impacts occur. And you're absolutely right that a sizable portion of individual filers are small businesses. Mm-hmm. And so they would definitely see a substantial hit in their increase in income tax. Absolutely.
Yeah, but agreeing with you on the where the funds go is the really tough part. And again,
Yeah.
I need you to underline this again, is that it's going to fall on legislators to decide where that money goes in education. So it's not going to go right back into a teacher's pocket or into their classrooms.
Well, yeah, according to Ledge Council's fiscal note, something like 750 million would be above what the minimum requirements of the law, and that would then be up to legislators to determine how it gets appropriated, right?
Yeah.
Out of this fund to education in some way. Right.
As much as you think it would be going right back to your kid's favorite teacher and into their pocket for their paycheck, it might not.
You don't know. I mean, this is up to local control. And this is part of the challenge. I mean, we spent a lot of time running just statistical tests on the impact of per pupil spending on school performance. We spent a lot of time trying to understand, is there any positive correlation across all Colorado school districts, across state by state, nationwide. We spent a little bit, probably too much time thinking about this to see if we could say, okay, you get extra money on average, that will translate to some performance benefit and outcome for students as it relates to graduation rates or some other factor. And, again, it's in the report. We publish how we went about those tests, and there's little to no correlation. And actually, in some ways, it's almost negatively correlated, partially because of the way the formula works here in the state, where more at-risk schools get more per pupil spending. And so it's very hard to tease out the extent to which this would have any performance benefits. And you don't know if it's going to go to actually improve the situation as it relates to teacher pay. It's up to the local discretion.
Right. We're going to change change gears one more time,
Great.
quite literally into transportation. I had to get a pun in there. So we have two that you can vote yes on, so one or the other. Proposition 110 is Let's Go Colorado, and Proposition 109 is Fix Our Damn Roads. Both of those sound amazing to me. So, because I do believe we need to fix
transportation. Well, you can vote for both if you want.
You can, but it seems counterintuitive.
That's right. You still can. Yeah, these are two issues, and we lumped them together in our ballot guide because they really do address very similar issues that relates to funding our state's infrastructure. I do just want to make the point that while they are being talked about a lot, and if you listen to the two advocates and proponents, they're showing up to debates together, and so it definitely they are looked at in a very similar light, but they are actually quite different in a lot of ways. So I think it's important for anyone to understand this, and they're talked about as a sales tax or existing funds, right? But they're actually on three fronts. I mean, the magnitude is very different. The magnitude of the funding we're talking about is incredibly different. That allocation, where that money goes, is very different, and then the pay for is different. So the magnitude on Proposition 110, Let's Go Colorado, would roughly generate just roughly about $1 billion a year in new sales tax revenue. So it increases the state sales tax from right about 2.9 to 3.52%. So a 0.62 addition to the percent to the state sales tax rate. So for a $100 purchase, you're paying an extra 62 cents. It would generate about $1 billion in new revenue over the next 20 years. So it sunsets after 20 years. 45% of the new money would go to state projects at CDOT. 40% would go to local municipal projects, and 15% of that money would go to transit multimodal projects. So if we just isolate the 45% of that billion increase that's going to CDOT, CDOT has come out and said it would allow for them to bond up to roughly about $6 billion in new bonding authority. For Proposition 109, which is using money from existing sources, would only provide funding and bonding authority to CDOT to the tune of about $3.5 billion. So already you have a significant difference in terms of how much money would be allocated to CDOT. On top of it, 110 would then also provide funds to local municipal projects and multimodal.
And that's, I think, one thing that is my favorite part about Proposition 110 is that it does get allocated, right? It's not just in the state government. You have your local governments that can decide what to do with this money, and the multimodal transportation. I personally think that's great. But Proposition 109 doesn't raise your taxes, and so I
Right.
think that's going to be the issue that a lot of people see, because the argument that I've seen for 109 is that, yeah, we're still getting a lot of these projects done, and we're not raising your taxes.
There's a lot of overlap in that, again, in the CDOT project list, so just the state project. There is a lot of overlap. The ballot 109 is put together they've 66 projects. 110, they've now have a project list of, I think, around 115 projects. So there is overlap, but there's a lot more under 110. And then to your point, 50% of those projects in those state lists are on I-25 and I-70. So if you want not major highway expenditure, 110 is really the only way that those funds get to those local municipal projects.
Yes, absolutely. Chris, it is always a pleasure to have you in here. I always run out of time with you because we have so much to talk about, and this is going to be exciting. So be sure tomorrow to go vote. And before you get there, CSPRco.org for this ballot guide. More information. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page while you're here. Chris, again, thank you so much for joining me.
Yep. Thank you very much, Alex.
Yes. Have a great day.